So generally, if you're a taxpayer and you're doing your tax returns and you have kids that are dependents of yours, so generally they're under 18, let's say they're small children, you are allowed to claim them as dependents on your tax return. And in certain cases, you can get child tax credits, you can get dependent care credits. But of course, in order to claim these credits on your return, you've got to follow all the, appropriate formalities that the IRS requires. One of which is making sure you've got the appropriate documentation, right? And so the first thing to start with is, okay, so let's say you've got a child and you're paying for dependent care. What do you need from that provider? Well, obviously, at the end of the year, you'll need to know, how much you paid that individual or that company during the course of the calendar year. But it's also very important to collect the appropriate withholding certificate, right? So the IRS has created a custom certificate for this. It's the IRS form W-10. And so it looks very similar to the form W-9, right? And we have a copy of that down here just for review as well. But you notice there's a lot of similarities between the two, and there's also a couple fields that exist on one and not the other. So let's go through what the distinctions are and why you need one over the other. So if we start with the W-9, everybody's familiar with this, right? I mean, if you start a new job as an employee, if you're an independent contractor, if you go to open a bank account, generally the company or the individual that's going to be paying you is going to request this kind of information. So the W-9 is designed to request a taxpayer ID number, name, and other information because the person that's going to be paying you anticipates some sort of reporting obligation, right? So, for example, if I'm running a law firm and then I want to hire a marketing consultant to do some advertising, consulting for me, and I'm going to pay that person $2,000. I'm engaged in the trade or business of providing legal services, and now I'm hiring someone who is also engaged in their own trade or business of doing marketing to perform some services for me. And so that might require a Form 1099 obligation, either a 1099 NEC or perhaps a 1099 miscellaneous, depending on whatever the character of the work is. So that's what the W-9 is designed to do, right? We want to collect their name, the business name, if they have one, how it's taxed under Chapter 3, right? Are they a C Corp, S, partnership, etc., their address, and then their taxpayer identification information. So the key takeaway there is the W-9 is used because you are engaged in your own trade or business and you're collecting this from an individual or company because you think you might have a reporting obligation, right? Contrast this with the W-10, right? Up here, W-10, a lot of the same information, the name of the provider, the taxpayer's identification number, your address, but there's obviously a couple things missing here, right? We don't really care what kind of entity it is, how it's taxed for Chapter 3 purposes, right? We don't care if it's a C Corp or an S Corp or anything like that. And then the other takeaway here is, this is designed because we'll need this information to complete our 1040, right? And the child tax credit forms and the dependent care credit forms. We don't need this to do any 1099 reporting. So, if I have two small children and I take them to a dependent care provider and I pay, let's say, $5,000 a year for that dependent care, I don't have to issue a 1099 to that dependent care provider at the end of the year, right? Because I'm not engaged. There's no trade or business that exists between the two of us, right? I'm doing this for personal reasons, right? These are my kids. These are my personal kids. So I'm dropping them off to be taken care of at this facility. Now they're engaged in the trade or business of providing that dependent care, but there's no trade or business relationship between the two of us. So I need the W-9, for purposes of completing the appropriate forms on my 1040. But there's no prospect of me having to file a 1099 miscellaneous or an NEC or other variant to report that income to the care provider. So it's important to collect this form. Again, you keep this for your records, right? You don't have to send this form to the IRS, but you want to have this, on file, internally in case the IRS ever does, audit the return or look at some of the elements and ask, okay, do you have proper documentation for all of this, right? Do you have the name of the provider, their ID number, and have they signed it, right? So, yeah, so very important. Most care providers are, quite frankly, caught up to speed on these obligations, right? So, when you sign on to a company that does this full time, these will be part of the onboarding documents. They'll give you this information. If you just want to hire someone as an individual, right? Let's say your neighbor is going to provide care for your children, and you're going to pay them X amount of dollars, a year. They might not be familiar with these right off the bat, so it's important to bring this to their attention and get them to complete these forms. So, yeah, so that covers it. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop a comment below or shoot me an email. And that includes questions on these forms or the dependent care credit, just generally speaking. So, okay, so again, thanks for watching and listening, and I look forward to seeing you soon.